Okay, we're back up and running. We have the slides up, so over to you, Venky.
All right. Thanks, everyone. All right. So Yodlee is a subsidiary of the InvestNet group of companies. Yodlee itself was set up back in '99 and is based out of Redwood Shores in California. Its core, it has a pretty extensive experience in providing data aggregation services. And its core products include a variety of data aggregation products as well as account verification services. Its primary market is the US. It has a pretty extensive presence in the US, Europe, and in South Africa. Now, from an India perspective, they recently acquired, in February of this year, they acquired a company called Finbit.io, which is a small startup that was also specializing in data aggregation products in the Indian context. At the moment, Finbit.io provides access to data as well as analytic services off of this data. Yodlee Finsoft is the account aggregator offering of Yodlee and was incorporated in 2019. Was in 2019. Its core function is core business model is to build and operate as an account aggregator, and by regulation, we cannot do anything else. So account aggregation is our only offering. Finbit, on the other hand, does provide access to the Indian data ecosystem through a variety of options, of which the account aggregator through Finsoft is one of them. Right. So following that, I just wanted to reiterate and give again a quick overview of the ecosystem. I think Sid did a great job yesterday with this flow and also a technical deep dive into the architecture. But just to kind of cover the key points, there are primarily four key stakeholders in this ecosystem. You have the FIPs, which are the financial information providers. You have the FIUs, which are the financial information users. You have the end user who actually owns the data. And right here in the center, you've got the consent custodians, also known as the account aggregators, right? Now, there is also a component of a central registry in place, which is kind of a central store for all the metadata relating to the various stakeholders in the ecosystem. The objective of the registry is to provide information so it becomes easier for people to connect and be interoperable, right? Now, in terms of data access and data flow, right? Anything related, any data access request has to flow through the account aggregator here in the middle. So, for example, if you need a loan and you go to a lending company, the typical flow in this, as part of this ecosystem, would be that the company would essentially capture all the information they need from you, for your KYC and so on. When it comes to request for data, they will initially send something called as a consent request to an account aggregator, right? So let's say, if they signed up with Finsoft, it would come into Finsoft, and at that point, the user would need to have what is called a VUA, a virtual user address, with the Finsoft entity. So once that is set up, the user will receive a notification saying that he's got a consent available for approval. He goes into the Finsoft app and links the account that he wants to expose the data for, and then clicks approve. Now, one key thing to remember is at this point, through the account aggregator, all that the user can do is actually is change the status of the consent, right? So you can either, at this point, if it's in a pending status, you can only either approve it or you can reject it. The user cannot change any of the underlying parameters that are part of the consent request, right? If he or she doesn't agree with what's being requested for, they will need to reject it, and at which case they need to work with the FIU to make the required changes and regenerate a new consent request, right? Now, assuming it's a happy flow, they approve the request. Once the request is approved, the AA will generate what is known as a consent artifact, which will encapsulate all the key details relating to the consent, right? So this will essentially be the user, what account he has provided for access, what is the purpose for the consent, what is the range of financial data that is needed for the consent, and so on, right? It will then send these consent requests to the FIU as well as the FIPs involved in the transaction. For example, the user could choose to link multiple accounts. So, for example, if I'm going for it, I could go with, I could attach one of my SBI accounts and one of my ICICI accounts. In which case, the consent artifact will be sent separately to SBI and to ICICI, but only containing details of their respective of the accounts custody with their respective banks. Right now, once that consent request has been generated and sent out, the FIU can then needs to generate what is known as an FI data request. Now, as part of the FI data request, they will send the consent artifact and they will initiate this request with the account aggregator. Now, the account aggregator will then examine the request and verify that it matches the consent parameters. If there is any issue with that, so for example, if it comes in with additional data than what is provided in the consent, the request will be rejected. Right now, if everything is fine, then the consent gets routed to both the banks to pull the required data. Right now, all these operations are actually asynchronous, so it's essentially a request-response pair that gets handled through the API calls. Now, let's say, for example, the request, when SBI receives the request, they will essentially kick off the processing at their end. Before that, they will of course validate the consent, and assuming it meets the consent parameters, they will essentially start building the package of data that needs to be transmitted. Once the data is ready, they will send what is known as an FI data ready notification to the AA, to Finsoft. Now, when Finsoft receives it, Finsoft will then make another request called an FI data fetch from SBI to pull the required data. Right now, once this is done, SBI will then send the encrypted data to Finsoft, which Finsoft will then persist in its database temporarily. Now, in this particular instance, since there are two FIPs involved, Finsoft will also need to wait for ICICI to complete its data fetch before pulling the required data. Once it has the entire data package ready, it will then send the data ready notification to the FIU, and the FIU will then need to do a data fetch, following which Finsoft will deliver the required data. Now, this entire interaction is defined as per the Revit spec, and you'll find the details in the technical specifications document that has been circulated. Now, in terms of the data encryption, again, from an AA perspective, we will have metadata. We will have access to the metadata relating to the request, right? So we will know who the request is for, which are the FIPs involved, what are the FIUs involved. But beyond that, we do not have any access to the actual underlying data itself, right? Now, in terms of data storage, we do store it temporarily in our database until we get everything and until we deliver the data to the FIU. The moment the data is delivered to the FIU, it will be purged from our system. Worst case, if the fetch does not happen, it will essentially get purged end of day from our systems, right? Now, in terms of the data, in terms of the FIPs involved, I believe now there are about 19 different FI types that are currently available as per the Revit specification. Now, in our Sandbox, we are currently supporting deposit information from a couple of banks. Now, again, these are all mocked up data. We do not have access to live actual bank data in our sandboxes. This is all mocked up data. We do provide so I think there'll be about like 4 or 5 accounts with I think 3 to 4 months worth of transactions available for access. The details are provided in our integration document. We also have the ability in our sandbox to import data. So you can either use the default data that we provide, or you can use our template to upload the data if you've already got access to certain data that you would like to use in your application. Again, at the moment, it is primarily deposit, that savings and checking account that we support. Right. Moving on. Okay, so now we come to the actual crux of integration with our systems. So we have a couple of options to integrate. The first option is through an offering through our Finbit entity called FIU Connect. Now, I walked you through the entire flow of a data fetch operation as per the as defined by Revit. And as you can see, I think there's a lot of back and forth in terms of request responses and consents that need to be generated and so on. So our perspective of building FIU Connect is to try and make this process as seamless and as straightforward for people who primarily just want to get access to data without really getting into the nitty-gritties of the Revit API spec itself, right? Uh, so this is where our Finbit FIU Connect entity comes into the picture. So what we've essentially done is FIU Connect essentially will do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of consent generation and all the request responses relating to FI request and FI data fetch. And from an FIU perspective, from your application perspective, there are a very simplistic set of APIs that you would need to implement that will essentially primarily pull the decrypted data from FIU Connect. That's another feature that we provide. If you're plugging into the AA ecosystem, all the data would be encrypted. So you would need to build the logic at your end. With FIU Connect, we take that complexity away from you. So the data would be delivered in the XML format that we receive, that the banks generate as defined by Revit. Right. So Finbit FIU Connect is essentially a layer that will sit between the FIU app here on the right and the AA account aggregator ecosystem here on the left. Right now, FIU Connect is coded to connect to Finsoft, but we will be building out. It will have the capability to connect to other account aggregators as well. So, for example, if your FIU comes in, if you have a client who already has a VUA with, say, the Perfios system, you can provide you can take in the VUA, and then FIU Connect will automatically connect and route the request to the Perfios account aggregator, right? We are also committed to ensuring that if any new account aggregators come on board, we will set up our connectivity to them. So from an FIU perspective, that complexity is again hidden from you. You just need to focus on building your application and pulling the data that you require. Working with the ecosystem, that is something that FIU Connect will take care of, right? So again, there's probably 2 or 3 custom APIs that you would need to implement on your side. FIU Connect will talk as per the Revit spec with the account aggregator, and of course the Finsoft's AA will has implemented the Revit API as far as FIP integration is concerned. Okay. Now, as far as UI integration is concerned, there are a couple of points here. The FIU Connect UI, which we'll go into in a little bit, already comes embedded with the Finsoft AA client. What this means is, from your perspective, from an FIU application perspective, you can actually embed the Finbit, the FIU Connect UI into your experience. We also provide a way to customize the look and feel, so it kind of mimics more of the FIU app. And we've got sample codes that detail how that can be accomplished. So this is all part of our integration document, right? So our expectation is, I think, from an FIU perspective, you will essentially take the user through the entire loan journey without him actually having to flip across to different applications or different websites, right? So that's our primary offering relating to FIU Connect. The second one is where you can connect directly to the Finsoft account aggregator, excuse me, the application. As you might have suspected, what this means is you will need to implement all the Revit APIs as has been published. You will also need to take care of consent lifecycle management and so on. From a UI perspective, again, you have the option of embedding the AA client UI within your experience and also customizing it to a certain extent. So it feels relatively seamless to the end users. Now, details for all of these integrations are available on our website at www.yodleefinsoft.com. And of course, we are also available on our Slack channel to answer any questions that you have relating to the integration. Okay, so moving on again. Excuse me. Key highlights of the two approaches. If you're integrating directly with Finsoft AA, so for example, if you're coming up with use cases where you want to help FIUs on board, that's when you would choose to integrate with a Finsoft AA platform. In that case, yeah, you will need to implement all the APIs. You will also need to take care of the authentication and the verification models, as well as decryption of FI data. With FIU Connect, again, the obvious benefits are simplicity. We take away the complexity of connecting to the ecosystem. We take care of all the signature and the authentication procedures. We also take care of decryption. So when you get it out of FIU Connect, it is decrypted data that you can then parse however you require. There is a minor loss of control in terms of handling notifications because we are internally consuming a lot of the notifications. We don't necessarily expose every single a notification out to the FIU. Again, if that is something that you specifically want, I mean, we do provide key lifecycle change events as well as when FI data and of course the FI data fetch requests. And if there's anything else, yeah, we can consider it. We can have a discussion and see if that is something that that we can make available if it makes sense. Okay. All right. So what I would like to do is just give you a quick walkthrough of a sample FIU integration demo. So what we've done is we've created a mock-up of a lending app and have given a walkthrough of how we could how you would integrate with FIU Connect and the Finsoft AA client. Okay. So here we go. All right. So this is our FIU. This is our Finbit FIU loan application mockup. So essentially, let's say we are looking at like a 6 lakh loan for 2 years. There's some terms and conditions, and we're going to go ahead and proceed to linking the account. So now, just to set the context, this is essentially your application, the FIU application that you will be building. When you hit proceed to link account, it will then transition into the FIU Connect. So the implementation over here is through FIU Connect. So when I click on link account, it's going to transition into the FIU Connect application. Now, as you can see, I think this is embedded within an iframe here. You have the option of selecting an account aggregator. At the moment, it is just Finsoft. And then when you click on next, this will then go on, and then it will pull up our AA client offering. So at this point, we are assuming that the user has registered an account. Now, if it is a new user, you can actually go ahead and go through the registration process right here. So you can register the account, and then the moment the VUA is generated, the rest of the process will kick off. Right. So for now, I'm essentially going to use my account. I'm not a robot, and yes, of course, I will have to verify. And 1, 2, 3. I think Google Captcha has something against me. I have never been able to pass this without actually having to fill that in. Anyway, so now you log in. Now, once log in, the primary dashboard there is going to be your link account page. So I've already got 3 accounts linked. Now, what's happened in the background is as you've logged in, the FIU Connect receives a callback from the AA client giving the customer VUA, and it has automatically generated a consent request using a set of default parameters. Now, you will be able to edit the default parameters through query params. when you embed the FIU adapter. But for now, it has essentially generated a consent request, and I've received a notification on my phone saying that there is a consent pending approval. So let's head into that. So you go to consent list, right? Now, the consent list over here is only going to show you the consents that the user has for your specific application, right? Now, our AA client application is also available as a web app. So if users log in separately to the web app, they will actually see a full list of all the consents that they have across all FIUs. Time permitting, I will show you that right after this demo. Right, so I've got 3 active requests, and then this is a pending consent for that was just generated for the demo app. So I click on this again. Now FIU connector 1. So that's the name of our demo app. So the name of the demo app will come here. The purpose is an aggregated statement. So I think this needs to comply with the purpose codes that are defined by Revit. The data life is how long you'd want to store it. Data range is the range of data that is requested as part of this consent. The consent range specifies how long this consent is valid for. Now, because this is a lending use case, it is a one-time request for access of data. So we're essentially saying you need to pull it within, there's like a 1-week window that we defined as default to be able to do everything you need to do with this particular request, which from an FIU perspective is primarily to pull the data, right? So once all this is done, again, we're talking about transactions. It's a one-time request, right? Now you now need to link the accounts that you would like to be part of this request. So in this case, I'm going to give in a couple of them. I accept the terms and conditions, and then I click approve. Now we do have a 2-factor authentication here, and the consent PIN is something that you would choose during user registration. That the user would choose rather during user registration. And this is required as part of any consent lifecycle change. Right. One other thing to note is, as I mentioned earlier, as part of the entire request, we are unable to change any of the parameters relating to the consent. So the only thing you can actually do is either approve or reject it. So this I'm going to go ahead and approve it. Now, once this is done, there's essentially a series of callbacks happening within the application, and the consent status gets bubbled back up to FIU Connect and also to the core FIU application, right? Now, what happens after this is there's a lot of mechanics in the background. So once FIU Connect receives a confirm to consent, it then automatically generates an FI request relating to the consent. Once it receives the data ready notification from the AA, it then pulls the data back into its systems, decrypts it, and then generates generates an FI data ready equivalent notification to the core FIU app. Once that is done, your app can then pull the decrypted data, and you can go ahead and process it however you want, right? So that's kind of our core integration offering. What I quickly like to show is also our overall app. So right. So this is the code. This is the primary screen that you saw that was embedded earlier in the FIU app. So as you can see, I think right now our default style incorporates the InvestNet blue. It's a color that we call InvestNet blue. But essentially, that is something that you can override. We do require the logo to be present, however, because as per the regulation, the activity needs to be done within the AA client domain, and that's one way we have of indicating that this is all owned by the AA client and not by the FIU application, right? Oh, what do you know? All right. So now again, so once you go in again, as you can see, the screens are actually very similar to what you would see, what I showed you earlier. You have the consent list, you have the link new account. Now the consent list, if I click on it, as you can see, there's a lot more consents that you see here. So for example, there's a revoke consent. There's a bunch of them for Yodlee, Finsoft, AA, and then of course you have the 4 ones that are defined for your application. So these are the ones that you would have access to, and this entire list is everything that the user has gone. So he's gone to like other FIUs and given other consents. So this is basically his entire consent dashboard, right? Now a quick look into our AA client link account flow. So We currently have a couple of banks, mock banks available for testing. So the initial process is once the user registers with a particular account aggregator, they need to link their accounts or attach their link their accounts to the account aggregator. So VUA is generated, and then you go through this account linking process. Now, what we do here is we essentially do an account discovery with using the phone number. So one key thing to note is when the user registers with the AA, it has to be the registered phone number that they have with their accounts at the banks, right? So if they have multiple phone numbers that they're using for multiple accounts, they will need to use multiple accounts to manage them from an aggregator perspective, right? So showing you there are 3 accounts that are linked. I can select a couple of them across 2 FIPs, and then we do a link account. Now, in this particular case, I think this is how we've devised the user experience. I'm quite looking forward to see how, if any team is actually taking a different perspective on account verification with OTPs, especially if there are multiple OTPs involved, because you can actually link multiple accounts across different FIPs. If it is multiple accounts in the same FIP, there's only one OTP that would be generated, but this situation will happen because I selected SBI and ICICI. So then I link this, then I link this one, then I'm done, and we head back. And then I'm going to see a couple of my ICICI. I'm going to see my ICICI account as well over here, right? Now, from an core AA client perspective, I think that's kind of pretty much what you can do. You can look at this. You can also go into the consent list, for example, and if I want to pull up a consent, I can actually pause a consent, right? If I do a pause, it puts a temporary hold on any activity relating to that consent. So if the users put it on hold, and then for example, if it is a periodic fetch and the users put the consent on hold, until that is cancelled, you will not be able to pull, or rather the AA Finsoft will not serve as any data requests using that consent, using the pause consent. Right. So once you pause it, then again it refreshes, and then you're going to see this one is paused over here. And then revoke is more of a permanent cancellation of the consent. So pause, they can go on and reinstate it later, but revocation is permanent. If they want to reinstate it, they will need to go in and do the entire process of consent request and generation again. Okay. All right. Now let me just go back to my. So from a demo perspective, I think that's kind of primarily what I had. Now the documentation that we are providing on our website, I think, will cover a lot of this in detail. It essentially walks you through. I mean, it takes a lending use case as an example and walks you through in detail how you would integrate with the UI as well as with the APIs, along with sample URLs and sample code that you can that you can use. Right now, okay, let me go back to my deck. There's a couple of things I still need to cover. All right. Again, so I mentioned this earlier. So once everything kicks off in earnest, we are always available on our Slack channel. So any questions that you have, please feel free to post it. We will get back to you. Sandbox access can be requested through our website, www.yodleefinsoft.com. There is a request for Sandbox link at the top. So if you just hit it and provide, we require a brief description of what your product is and whether you would like to connect through our AA or through FIU Connect. If you are unsure, that's fine. We're more than happy to answer your queries on the Slack channel. What we will also so once we do that, what we will provide is what is known as an FIU ID and an API key. Now the API key is something that you will need to use in every request. Again, if you are integrating directly to our Finsoft AA, this is something that you will need to embed as part of the HTTP header. If it is with FIU Connect, you will need to provide. So I think we will be using FIU Connect. Will use your API key to generate all the requests on your behalf. So that's one less thing that you would need to worry about. Okay. All right. So I think that's kind of pretty much it from our walkthrough perspective. Vikas, is there anything else that you would like to comment on? I think from a dev portal and from an integration perspective. If not, we can just dive into the questions. All right, so let's do this. So, Ariman, I guess we can dive into our questions then.
Yeah, sure. You know, right? Top questions first, the most upvoted ones first.
Yodlee Sandbox. All right, so the first one. So far, we haven't heard anything about the pricing that AAs will follow around, knowing it's free for hackathon. I'm curious over how the pricing would look in production, and are there any regulations on that matter? Okay, so a couple of things. So first is, yes, I think for the hackathon there is no there are no commercials involved as far as the hackathon itself is concerned. Now pricing for when we launch in production, I think that is something I think that we are still working our way towards. I think a lot of it would depend on how. I mean, there is no regulation around it. It's just that I think we have to be transparent. So I think once we have a pricing model defined, it will be updated on our website. At the moment, that is something that is still being discussed. All right, second one. In FIU Connect, when you right. In FIU Connect, when you decrypt the data, what role are you playing on AA's barred from decrypting the data, or is FIU Connect itself an FIU? All right, so here's the difference. Yes, I think from an AA perspective, we are entirely data blind. So FIU Connect as such is actually an offering of our sister company Finbit. It is not a Yodlee Finsoft account aggregator offering, right? So legally, Finbit and Finsoft are two separate entities. From a Finsoft perspective, all we are doing is implementing the Revit APIs and providing access to the FIU. FIU Connect, as far as we are concerned, FIU Connect is no different from any other FIU, right? So we would essentially service requests from FIU Connect no different than from any other FIU. Finbit itself would be acting here as a third-party service provider. So from a data regulatory and from a legality perspective, it is separate from the account aggregator entity, and therefore, and in a sense, it is acting on behalf of the underlying FIU, right? So, for example, in terms of encryption, there are a certain set of keys that will need to be generated and exchanged. Now, while FIU can facilitate that, I think the actual key generation will need to be done by you, by the teams, and then given to FIU, and then given to FIU Connect, so it can do the decryption on your behalf. Okay, next one. FIU Connect will work with Yodlee A only, or will be interoperable with other AAs as well. I think you mentioned that in the presentation before. Okay, all right. See, at the moment, I think for the hackathon, it is going to work only with the Finsoft AA. But as we get but when we get operational, FIU Connect will provide connectivity to other account aggregators as well, because it will be acting as a TSP, as an FIU enabling product. Okay. Is pause mode of consent defined in the Revit spec, or is this a specific implementation from you guys? Hadn't heard about pause. No, pause is part of the Revit spec. So I think for consents, you have approve, reject, pause, and revoke as the key actions that you can form. I mean, there is a bit of workflow involved, of course. I mean, you can't get to. I mean, you can get to pause only if it is in an approved state. You can get to pause and revoke only if it is in an approved state. When we initially get the request, it is in pending, and from pending you can either go reject or approve, and if it is approved, then you can go revoke or pause. Okay, the next one. Yesterday, one of the speakers touched on the subject of exporting your own data without using an FIU. Can you explain a little more over how its flow would look like? Example, I want to export my bank transactions data to see it locally. Okay, so I'm assuming you are talking about the ability to request, you're talking about a user's ability to use the account aggregator to aggregate their own financial accounts, right? Now, the technical specifications document does specify that this is something that the AAs can do. However, at the moment, our client offering isn't providing this yet. This is something that is on our roadmap and will come in as a later item. Not yeah, and typically, I think the way that would work is the AA client or you yourself. I mean, it would essentially have to mimic itself as an FIU to request for the data. So it will request for the consent, and the rest of the flow will happen, and then the data would be pushed encrypted to the client, and then I think we need to do the decryption on the client side. Okay. FIU Connect will work with any AA as it uses Revit. Oh, okay, fine. That is you. If I don't like consent parameters sent by the FIP when I cancel, can I suggest new parameters? No, I think the cancellation is it's a binary cancellation. I think you will need to work separately with the FIU. So that is something I'm assuming whoever is developing an FIU app is probably going to build that into the user experience. So when they receive a reject, probably sort of figure out what's the best way to handle that on their end. Okay. So the next one, users need to be redirected from FIU to AA for AA account creation, since most people will first come across AA through an ecosystem. Is this user journey already built out? Sure. I think if you looked at my demo, looked at my demo. I think with FIU Connect, it's actually embedding the it's embedding the Finsoft AA client. And right in the initial login page, you also have a registration option, and you can walk through the registration flow and then do the consent. Actually, because if you don't have your phone number registered, do you think you could do a walkthrough using and showing the new user flow using our demo app? Or maybe Satish, can you do that walkthrough?
Hey Venky. Sorry, I didn't get you.
No. I was just wondering, maybe if we have, I mean, we've got a couple of minutes. I was wondering if you could show a new user AA registration flow through the FIU demo app.
Okay.
Because my number's already registered, so I was wondering if either of you could do it. Anyway, I mean, okay, let's not worry about that. But yes, I think that is something that can be that would be done through the user experience itself. Okay, the link provided on Sahamati website doesn't work. Can you share a redirect to working AA and FIU links? All right, let me follow up on that with the Sahamati folks. Don't we have standard Revit APIs for FIUs? Yes, there are a standard set of APIs defined, and they are available on the Revit site. These APIs are also available through the documentation folder on the Finsoft website. So we've essentially exposed the Swagger, the Revit Swagger APIs for both for the FIU, for the AA, and the FIP. So if you're implementing an FIU, what you would primarily need to implement are all the FIU notification APIs and all the consent and data flow APIs that are required by the account aggregator, by Finsoft. Okay. All right. How many of these data types are live? That is at production level as of now. By when is it expected for all data types to go live? Now, this is something that is increasing day by day. Now, at the moment, I think various banks are at different points in their integration life cycle. But I think over the next few months, I think we should be seeing a lot more of them coming up. So does that via Finbit, a non-regulated fintech, also get AA data? Okay, so okay, now just to be clear, right now, FIU Connect cannot, unless there is an underlying FIU that is using FIU Connect. If Finbit itself cannot use FIU Connect to pull data from Finsoft for its own purposes, because exactly it is not a regulated entity. It is a third-party service provider. So we facilitate other FIUs to come onto the ecosystem, and and these FIUs would need to be regulated by either RBI, SEBI, PFRDA, or IRDAI as per regulation to be part of the ecosystem. Would your API be able to integrate with R3 Corda-based blockchain platform? It's an interesting question. I think because do you want to take that? At the moment, I think we don't we don't have that capability yet. But please reach out to us separately. We'd love to have a talk with you on what on what you're thinking of. What are other services offered by FIU Connect apart from consent management? It is essentially the entire range of services needed to pull data from the AA ecosystem. So it's not just, and again, when you're saying consent management, again, the Finsoft is the consent custodian. FIU Connect is facilitating facilitating the request responses needed for the consent and for the pulling of data. Beyond that, I think once that is done, it is essentially going to be providing the data. So what we are looking at is essentially an adapter. You can think of it as an adapter that you can use to come onto the AA ecosystem. It's also a single interface. So if there are multiple AAs that you want to support, you don't have to go around linking with all of them. You come into FIU Connect, and then it will provide access to all of them.
Maybe we'll just do a last question, Venky.
Sure.
So there's a top one, which I don't think it was answered by Ujjwal Gupta. Yesterday, one of the speakers touched on the subject of exporting your own data without using an FIU.
Actually, that was the first one that I handled. I kind of assumed they are talking about an end client accessing their own, or rather aggregating their own data through the AA client. That is something that is provided for in the technical specifications, but that is not something that we have implemented just yet. That is part of our roadmap as a future item, but we don't have that capability right now, but we are working towards it.
So maybe we can take the one about the XJWS signature in the header. Could you provide more information on the signature in the header, used in the header?
All right. Hey, Vikas, do you want to take that question?
I think we might be having a mic issue because we can't hear you, Vikas.
Okay, can you provide more information? See, actually, also on the XJWS section, okay, I'll take a stab at it. See, but then a lot of the details of this are actually already available on the Swagger site and also on the technical specifications provided. Our integration document also has a fairly detailed section on how to generate signatures. Essentially, just kind of walk through the JWT token that is used, and we're using what is known as a detached content header. And we essentially use a signature. Then there's like a base 64 encoding that happens. I think more technical. I think we're almost out of time, and we can go into it separately if needed. But I think the details are available in multiple channels. It's there in the technical specifications. It's there in the Swagger. It's also available. It will be available rather on our website when we publish our integration document. Now again, the integration specifics. Now you can sign up for Sandbox immediately. Our documentation is still getting updated. I think by end of tonight, I think we should have a final version of the integration document live on the website for review.
Super. So thank you very much, Venky. Can I please ask everybody to give a round of virtual applause for our speakers? Thank you very much for all that information. And
One last word, Ariban. So thanks much, guys, and really looking forward to see what you guys have in store for us over the next month.
Superb. So we'll be taking a short break, and at 4 p.m. we'll be back with the next presentation of the One Money API Sandbox. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Go to use the social lounge. Thanks again, Vikas, Satish, and Venky.
Thanks, Ariman.